Ni hao YouTube, what's going on? Salam to China. In this video I will show you all the video settings you can put on the Osmo Action, and I will compare this to the GoPro 7, and you will see what kind of differences we have there. So let's check out the lowest resolution video setting. First, we can see here on the GoPro we can choose a different format, 4:3 format, or the standard 16:9 format. The lowest resolution is 420 with a, I think, minimum of 60 frames per second. And when you choose this option, you have the internal stabilizer hyper smooth activated. Whereas for the DJI Osmo Action, for the minimum resolution of 720p, the lowest frames per second is 200. 240 is the max, which is pretty good, but you have to remember that Rocksteady is not available here. Let's see also for the GoPro. We can choose a max of 240 frames per second, but also here the hyper smooth stabilizer is not available, and the same on 120 frames per second. It's only available at 60 frames per second, which the Osmo Action does not offer. So let's check out 1080p. Let's start with the GoPro. So we have a minimum of 24 frames per second. Hyper smooth is available, 30 frames per second, 60, 120. You see there, hyper smooth is not available. Hyper smooth is only available on 24, 30 and 60 frames per second. At 120 it's not available anymore, and the same for 240 frames per second, and you will have to use a different codec, which is the HEVC codec. So make sure this is possible with your computer, and you will see at this 240 frames per second you have no stabilizer at all. Let's check out the 1080p for the Osmo Action. The lowest is 24 frames per second. Rocksteady is available. Same for 25, 30, 48, 50, and 60. Yeah, 100. And you will see, yeah, you see, as soon as we go on 100, Rocksteady is not available anymore. Yeah, you see, GoPro only offers the standard internal stabilizer for 120 frames per second, and also, yeah, the Osmo Action doesn't do the Rocksteady anymore at 120. Okay, let's check 200. Yeah, same, and 240 is the same. I don't know if the Osmo Action has any internal stabilizer available here at 120 frames per second, but I don't think so. It's the same as here, but at least at 120 frames per second, the GoPro at least offers the internal standard stabilizer. So now let's check out 2.7K. The lowest frames per second here is 24 for the GoPro. For sure, also with hyper smooth, 30, 60, 120. Now we go in the HEVC codec, and yeah, you will see no stabilizer available here, not even the internal one, and 240 frames per second are not available on 2.7K. So 120 frames per second is the max. Now let's check out the Osmo Action at 2.7K. You see immediately what's going on there. We have 24 with a stabilizer, 30 still stabilized with Rocksteady, 48 as well, 50 and 60. So that's something I would recommend. Use the 2.7K on a 60 frames per second, and the same on the GoPro. This is what I'm usually using. I think with these settings you get a pretty decent quality. Now with the, also here we can change the format to 4:3. It's the same for the Osmo Action. We have the same here. Hyper smooth stabilizer on a 2.7K and 60 frames per second, and you see the max here on the Osmo Action is only 30 frames per second, so this is just a little bit lower. Let's see what about the 4K. Let's do the 4K. You see you also need the codec here. We go back to 16:9 screen. We have the hyper smooth available for sure at a 24, 30 frames per second, and you see for, if you choose the 60 frames per second, you will use the HEVC codec again, but still you have hyper smooth stabilization, which is pretty cool. And there the whole story ends already. In 4K you can film on a 4K 60 frames per second maximum with the GoPro. And now let's check out the Osmo. We are on a 4K 24 frames per second, stabilizer available, 30 frames per second, Rocksteady available, 48 frames, Rocksteady is there, 50 frames, Rocksteady is there, 60 frames, Rocksteady is there. So this is basically the same thing here on the Osmo Action. And as you can see, yeah, you cannot push it farther to the 120 and 240 frames per second, so they are on the same level here, right? But there is a small difference. You've seen that the GoPro 7 on a 4K 30 frames per second with hyper smooth stabilization, and as soon as we go on the 60 frames per second, oh yeah, there is still hyper smooth stabilization. Okay, that is cool. So in this case, the GoPro 7 and the Osmo Action are exactly the same. Format 4:3. Let's check this out. Come on. We go on a 24 frames per second, use the HEVC, and then you see immediately for the 24 frames per second, the GoPro offers internal stabilizer, not the hyper smooth one, and the Osmo Action does not offer Rocksteady. For the 25, 30 frames per second, it's exactly the same. And when we choose the 30 frames per second, there is no stabilizer at all for the GoPro 7. So in my opinion, I think the biggest difference here, you could see that on a 2.7K. This is, in my opinion, the biggest difference, where you can just choose a higher frames per second. This is the only big difference you can see between those cams. On the 2.7K you can only go up to a 60 frames per second, whereas on the GoPro 7 you can go up to 120 frames per second at a 2.4K, but without any stabilizer. So make sure you absolutely use an external gimbal for this GoPro if you are filming in 2.7K at 120 frames per second. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you liked this video and this was helpful for you. In the next video we will check out how those settings actually look like in real life. We will do a comparison between the two in all the different settings possible, in all the different video settings possible. So make sure to subscribe, make sure to like and leave a comment. See you in the next video. Bye bye. 再见。